reason that you're choosing not to do it in-house? Or are you planning to transition to do it in-house? So for most people, the reason that they say they're not doing it is because it has so many moving parts. And when people say that, it really comes down to, which I've had my own experience with it, I don't understand it. I haven't done it before. I'm not familiar with it. I think it seems too complicated. So it's not based in I can't do it as much as I'm not clear on it or I'm not comfortable with it, which is something that, much like even starting your agency, you can do over time. So some of the big pieces, especially around the human resources role, whether it's outsourced or in-house, is compliancy. So it's not only compliancy from the employee perspective, there also are specific compliancy types of things that you have to do as an employer. So there's specific rules and regulations that you need to maintain, proper documentation, communication, chain of communication, to stay kind of at a state level compliant. So for those of you guys who may not have known, I am a former human resources professional. That was my first career. And there is an organization, and I'm going to share it here, where most of us who are in the industry were certified through. And it kind of says that, hey, this particular person has experience in all areas of human resources. So that looks like, and I'm typing, guys, organizational development. That looks like compensation, classification, staffing and recruitment, payroll processing, benefits and retirement. And typically those roles are referred to as human resources generalists. So if I was someone who was either deciding or transitioning to bringing my back office responsibilities in-house or starting them in-house, I would look for a person who is a human resources generalist, meaning that they've kind of touched and or had extensive experience in these different areas related to human resources laws and regulations, and labor management, benefits, payroll, staffing, classification. Not too many industries do classification, but it's still important. So that's a great starting point for someone in human resources. And that's kind of what I would look for. Does a person have to be a specialist? Maybe. Is a generalist better? Yes, but they don't have to necessarily be at the top tier. Like, they don't have to be at management level to be a benefit to a small business. I found in the conversations I've had with people who want to make the transition, it's more about them being a right fit for a small business than it really is about that affording the person, because I think that issue also comes up is, well, can I afford, a human resources generalist? Are they going to charge me like $100,000 or $75,000? I just don't have that. Whereas a human resources assistant, coordinator, so their role follows typically as a manager, assistant, coordinator type. Their role kind of gives you that same type of experience as well. Okay, Yara. I'll answer that question. So her question is, and that's a perfect segue, how she used the ERO for workers' comp, which is primarily what a lot of people have used them for, is the insurance piece. How do I handle that? And how do I handle transitioning out if they handle your payroll? So I talked a little bit about human resources and ways to look for people. Let's talk about payroll. And then at the end, I'll touch on the insurance piece. As I mentioned before, you really want to talk through and think through what payroll function are they providing. And you can answer two. Are they processing your payroll? Are they processing and funding your payroll? And what if any systems have you put in place to handle that? So if they're processing your payroll, there's a lot of different systems. Paychex, ADP, Gusto, all those companies do payroll processing. But if they're also funding your payroll, that's a separate issue, because either one, There are funding companies out there that just do the funding and then you process the payroll. But if you want to start where you're managing the funds yourself, so you're actually being a self, you're using the money that you have to pay your own payroll, you're self-funding your business, that's something different. And I think that's something that you should definitely plan for. And you can use, and I would ask for the reports. You can base, if you're going to say, hey, Shamika, I want to self-fund for 2022. That's fine. But you can use your previous payroll cycles from the funding company or the PEO or EOR. Whew, I'm having a tough time, guys, to get an idea of what your weekly payroll is and use that as a guide to determine how much money you need to have in place to do it yourself. So let me say that again. So for transitioning out the payroll piece of your employee of record company, you can either self-fund it or go to a payroll funding company. So most PEOs or back offices also do payroll processing and payroll funding. But there are companies out there that just do payroll funding. So, and we have some in the group as well. So I would determine what they're doing from the payroll standpoint of view. And then if they're just processing, then you can look for a system, ADP, Paychecks, Gusto. There's so many companies out there. QuickBooks does payroll processing as well, and kind of determine it from there. And then if they're also funding, make a decision about, will you go with another company that just does funding, or are you deciding to self-fund? So those things look like two different things when it comes to payroll. So the payroll piece is a little bit more layered because, one, you have to identify a system. Of course, you also want to identify the person that may be managing or processing that system. Again, that role doesn't have to be at a managerial level. It just needs to be someone who has the understanding of accounting concepts, who understands processing of payroll concepts and taxes and things of that nature. It could be a bookkeeper, it could be a payroll assistant or a payroll coordinator, or it could be a human resources / payroll coordinator. So any of those roles can be beneficial to do that and not be as costly. But like I mentioned earlier, the bigger segue is around how comfortable they are working with small businesses. Because in small businesses, as you guys already know, sometimes we have specific roles and responsibilities, but a big part of small businesses is duties as assigned and as needed. So you want to make sure that you're picking someone who has the experience but are also a team player. Feel free to drop any other questions, guys. So the second part, or the third part of the role of your payroll back office companies, is around the workers' comp or the insurance. And this is sometimes the bigger hurdle for people to overcome than the other two things. So there were 3 areas that I touched on that were areas that your typical PEO, back office, EOR provide services for. It was your human resources and compliance. So that looks like onboarding, and that looks like, employee documents and even employee relation related matters. And any compliance from a employer standpoint of view. And then of course, payroll. So that's payroll processing. Sometimes it's also funding that payroll, and any sort of benefits, management and things of that nature. So the last one is the insurance. So the insurance is a little bit of a bigger hurdle because it's not as easy of a transition for most people. So if a company houses your insurance, right? So if you have your insurance through a company, PEOA, and they have human resources, payroll functions, employment recruitment functions, credentialing compliance function, and then they also, because you don't always have to get them to have the insurance, have your workers' comp and your general and professional liability insurance, that transition looks different. And this is primarily why. When you choose to have a separate company have ownership or employee of record over your insurance, when you actually go out to the market and attempt to get your own insurance, specifically workers' comp, but it applies for the other two as well, your appearance from a business standpoint of view is as if you're starting over. And that's where, for me, that's a bigger challenge as a NOSA. So being a NOSA myself, having got insurance before, having to do it again, the process can be longer. And in the COVID climate, you may, if you don't have any other background, like say you hadn't started one agency already, appear riskier, meaning that there's more risk to bring you on as a client for workers' comp than you did a couple of years ago. So COVID has kind of shifted the insurance industry quite a bit. And as I mentioned, I am not an expert. I'm just speaking on my experiences. There are definitely experts in the group that I would encourage you to connect with. But the bigger thing is you really appear from an insurance perspective of starting over. So you don't get like credit. So like insurance, you want to get credit for having it in your business, just like you want to get business credit for being in business for a period of time. You don't get that credit if you're under kind of this umbrella of your back offices and EOR. And everybody's situation may look different, but this is generally the case. So when you decide to go out on the market and get your own insurance, you then have to factor in that, let's say it's not COVID, that you're a new business to them. Because even though you may have worked with the EOR or what have you for, however much time, when you come out, you don't get to take that time with you. So you don't get like, how some companies, I think the federal government does it, where you get like time and service. So like if you've had other experiences that wasn't within the federal government, as like a nurse, for instance, you can get credit. So you don't get credit for that time. So with insurances, you don't get credit. You can't say, hey, I work with this company, and that EOR or that back office gets the credit, which is also why it's a little bit easier for them to obtain those types of policies. But I'm not going to get into that. So that's a challenge. And not getting credit, say if your business was in place for a couple of years, means that sometimes you have a higher premium. So having a higher premium means that you kind of have to start from zero, even though you may have been in business for X number of years. And all of this should be outlining your contracts. I'm a big advocate, you guys have heard me say it before, of reading your contracts, but not getting that credit, potentially having to, because I've heard NOSA say they've been quoted $10,000 or what have you on different workers' comp plans, is part of that reason. They really don't have a evaluation of your risk level, even if you were with the other EOR or back office and you didn't have any issues. That's not something you can take with you. So that's primarily where I tell people you want to weigh the pros and cons, because some of the elements, and it should be outlined in your contract. If you haven't read it, today's a good day to do that. You don't get to take everything that they've done or everything that you've done with them with you, versus there are pieces of your business that you have to start over. So that's kind of where you kind of have to weigh what makes sense or where you want the business to be. For some people, it's very a viable option that they would never bring those roles in-house. That's fine. If you're only in it for these reasons, that's fine. But if you're saying, hey, well, Shmig, I want to do this, and I want to grow the business, and I want to expand, and I want this and this and this, and I want to eventually transition out, doing it on the early end of that particular situation is a little bit better than doing it latter. I've also seen for some, and I think we have a video here that touches on it too, for some people that at the point that they decided to transition out, there were a lot of hurdles that they had to overcome with the insurance, around getting access to their employees' information, having to set up payroll and things of that nature. So that's where you want to think about not so much the need that you have today, but where you see yourself in the future.